Let's get started. So today, our webinar is on Beyond Vision, Design Thinking for Strategic Leadership. Interesting take on the topic. So this is how we want to use our time together. I want us to just ground ourselves in the notion of strategic leadership. We probably all think about it a little bit differently, but we certainly know what our aspirations are when we're doing this. And we certainly know what the challenges are whenever we're trying to have the impact that we're looking for. So my hypothesis is that, at least for me, design thinking has served as the unlock, right? It's really helped me understand how to get through these challenges, and make sure that I can really help my clients, both as a consultant prior to starting my own company and now at Salt Collaboratory. But most of the time, assuming we can get there soon enough, is all in the case study conversation that we're going to have with our guest, Marina. So let's do a few quick introductions and we'll get the party started. So for those who don't know me, I'm Hannah Berson. I'm the founder and CEO of Salt Collaboratory. Most of my career has been in management consulting, sometime in industry. I was with Carney for a while, Capgemini, Point B, which is where Peggy and I connected. She was the chief marketing officer there. And I worked in all these different arenas, trying to help clients with incredibly complex challenges with the expectation that the answer should be there sooner rather than later. And it was a challenge. And when I discovered and learned about design thinking and I started to integrate it into my work, I could see a much more powerful way of working with clients to unlock and help them with their own challenges. And that's when I made my own pivot and I started Salt Collaboratory, which I view as a design thinking shop for strategic leadership. We help people with consulting, training, coaching. And in the past 5 years, we've gotten to work with clients from many sectors and many countries, all the way from Winnebago to Institute for Functional Medicine, which Marina will talk a lot about, Heinz, Delta Dental. So there's a lot of range, and I've been able to do a lot of interesting work by integrating design thinking into my approach to strategic leadership. Marina, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Thank you, Hannah. And it's so great to be here with all of you this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, or night time. I see we have somebody from Spain. So I had the good fortune of working across the world, and I served in a variety of leadership roles in non-for-profits and in corporate sector, working across Middle East, Asia, East Africa. I lived 8 years in the UK, so worked out of UK quite a bit across Europe. And so the common ground across all of these different organizations for me was creating alliances and building strategic partnerships that sort of make a difference to communities that need it the most. So that's also my personal passion. So I've been very fortunate to be able to pursue that across my different parts of my career. And it happens that it's the perfect match with design thinking. So I'm excited to share some of those examples with all of you here today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marina. And we're thrilled to have you. And when Marina and I were reflecting on our collaboration to date and going through our photo albums, because we have so much history and background together, it was really hard to pick the best images. But we've worked together for many years on at least 8 to 10 big projects across 4 different organizations. And what I think is interesting here is more to hear from Marina. I can tell you many times why I think design thinking is helpful, but what was interesting to her and why she reached for it. So, Marina, how would you talk about our story?
So actually, when Hannah and I were thinking about where did we start working together and how, she reminded me, and I thought that's a great story to share. I think it was about, 9 years ago? I was a chief operating officer at the time of a small but mighty international development organization. I was working in Southeast Asia and Africa, and I had a challenge. We just launched country operations in Myanmar, and we had one funding source, and I was building a pretty large team there, but needed to look beyond the sort of initial grant period, which was 2 to 3 years. How might we with the investment we were putting in and the fact that we were registering a country office sustained that. So I had a country director sitting with me in Seattle who was pretty exhausted from everything she had happening on her plate already. And then I had a chief finance officer sitting at the time in London that was saying, we can't hire any more staff if we're not going to start thinking about diversifying our income source. And there was me trying to create solutions that will meet the need of both and take the organization forward. And I happened to be chatting with Hannah because we met in a personal setting. Our kids ended up in the same school. And she told me, I do these things. I mean, I might be able to help. So here we are. This was pandemic and pre the virtual reality of our world. And we had Hannah bring a poster and work on one of her magic tools. I think it was the creative matrix, ended up really narrowing down the options and creating a really great common ground in terms of solutions that we weren't thinking about through this dialogue really across the world. And we were able to go and then develop additional programs in Myanmar, diversify that income source within the next year while taking into account the needs of the existing staff and sort of the resources we had. So I was pretty much hooked after that.
So that was our first foray into it together. But as Marina mentioned, we did some work when she was in that development organization. We did some work with tech professionals, these women professionals in Seattle. We did a lot of work together at the Institute for Functional Medicine, which we'll highlight today. And our last project that we worked on was for virtual doctors, which is, again, an important nonprofit for Africa. So we have found our way towards this approach in almost every conversation we've had about a strategic leadership challenge that Marina was facing. So what I've learned from that, just working with her, but other clients, some of whom are on the call today, is that the versatility of this way of working has been really helpful for me, for my clients, and for the organizations they work for. So let's talk about this strategic leadership space, right? Wouldn't it be nice if it were just easy to move from point A to point B and work our way through all the obstacles in the game? It isn't. And there's a lot on us to try to figure that out, right? Strategic leaders are the ones who are envisioning and planning and executing all of these innovative strategies. Somehow they're supposed to be able to hold the key and get us through the game plan. And I don't know about you, but I have spoken to some of you in your roles, and whether it's stuck in silos or other challenges, I know and you know that it's not as easy as it looks. So I just want to ask you, as you're thinking about your roles in strategic leadership, thinking about Marina's story of having to coordinate people across different places and be innovative and work with resource constraints, what comes to mind for you as some of your top obstacles as strategic leaders? And if you can pop them in the chat, Peggy will help us and let us know if we're seeing any common themes. Marina, what is it for you that's held you back? Does it look anything like these?
So I think this is something that we probably share with many who are hired into leadership positions. And I know we'll talk quite in depth about some examples, but when I was getting recruited and hired into at the time, IFM role, the role was basically to do strategic partnerships and innovation, not the innovation part in that. And this was bringing the function to a very different level. And so I was told numerous occasions, I'm sure some of you share that, you have a blank canvas. We're excited. Come make a change here. We want to hear what you can bring to the table. How many of you read the first 90 days when you go into a new role? Yeah, we all are under a lot of pressure to create an array of net positive developments, right, within the first 90 days. How might we get in and really understand and create solutions? And very quickly, you realize that you don't really have a blank canvas. You have a lot of team members and a lot of other leaders that have a stake in the game. And leadership is really about taking a step back and creating solutions with them rather than on your own. And so that's the journey I think that design thinking can help quite a bit, that I've learned along the way through some hard lessons. So excited to hear other stories here as well. I'm sure there's a lot to share here.
Piggy, has anybody shared anything about what they get stuck with that isn't necessarily represented in silos or fear of failure or lack of alignment?
It seems like a common theme I'm seeing here is getting people's attention. So people think they don't have time. People have opposing priorities. They don't know what they don't know. And also the stress of not moving fast enough and getting behind the marketplace. And so once you do move, you're already behind the eight ball.
Exactly. We could just stay miserable with all of that, or we could try to find a way out of it. So these are all the realities that we face. And now we want to see if there's something we can do about that. And the question that some of you may be asking, not all of you, because I know that some of you have had a lot of experience with leveraging design thinking precisely for this, is why? Why would you turn to design thinking? Why would you be curious about whether it was something that could be helpful? So for those of you who are the ones out there, I just want to touch very quickly on what it is and how it works. There's so much that's being written. There's so many other places where you can learn this, but let's at least get an even playing field in terms of our understanding of the space. So the first thing that we're going to talk about with design thinking is that it's a disciplined approach, right? A lot of people think about design thinking, sticky notes everywhere. It sounds like a mess. I'm organized. I need structure. It's not for me. Let's dispel that myth. It's actually a very disciplined approach that we can use in a structured way. And it's going to help us with creative problem solving. So if we've got something super easy to do, we're not going to put it out. But if we're really stuck, like Marina was, like many of you are, it might be a place to look. And those last three words of in the service of people is a really anchoring concept in design thinking. We don't design for the organization or the department or for the market. We design with our teams for the people who need the solution. And the way that we work makes sure that we don't forget that. And there are basically three main elements that I think about when we talk about design thinking. One is knowledge and appreciation for the framework. Frameworks are helpful. The other is how we work differently and think differently when we're using this particular approach. But honestly, the magic is in the methods. That if we're going to pull people together to work, we better not think we're having a meeting with the PowerPoint, because we're not going to make the kind of progress we need to get to those solutions. So touching very quickly on what is it, how does it work? Anybody who's familiar with design thinking will know the word empathy or empathize. Thinking about how we define challenges. You've heard Marina say, you can see how well I've trained her. There's just saying, how might we many times, just that language of possibility. How are we going to do something? We don't know. What's the answer? How might it turn out? We don't know. How are we going to do it together? We're going to work there and we're going to find the solution. And how are we going to do it? We're going to do it because once we've understood the challenge and we haven't jumped in without a deep understanding of what's going on, we're going to be open-minded, we're going to collaborate, and we're going to come up with lots of opportunities and ideas before we zero in on the one that's going to work. So this notion of being able to work together, look at a range of challenges and a range of opportunities, but zero in on the ones that are the best fit for the solution is the skill set that we learn when we work with the design thinking framework. And sometimes we start right at the beginning and go all the way to the end. And sometimes we jump in the middle and find that we need to even go back a step or two to be as robust as we need to be. Again, lots that we could talk about here. We could spend the whole webinar on what is design thinking, but I'm going to move us along, hoping that what you take away from this is when we think about design thinking, the first thing we do is make sure we understand and we don't jump to the answer. And the way that we understand and we work together is collaborative with diverse people and inputs and experiences, all the way being open to possibilities and zeroing in together on the ones that are best. And we'll see a little bit of that in our conversation today. And this is what happens when you step into a design thinking experience, whether it's a meeting or a full workshop. You're going to see a lot of visual representation. This is what my house looks like. You're going to see a lot more empathy and listening and curiosity. Collaboration is the name of the game. I don't know people who can do design thinking on their own, certainly some exercises, but this is a team sport. This is the place for creativity, for curiosity and questioning, and for being okay with going back if you need to. The iteration part of this is built in, and that relaxes that expectation that you have the perfect answer the minute you step out. So doing all of this sounds great, but the way that we do it, I chart, is by leaning on methods that have been contributed from many different disciplines. In fact, this particular curated list that you're seeing is from an organization called the Luma Institute. They looked at 1,000. They said these 36 are rock solid, learn these. And I'm a design thinking instructor from Luma, as is Linda, as is Jonathan, and probably others on the call, because this is such a rich and robust starting point for many of us when it comes to helping people work this way. But it's deep and it takes time to master. So even though we can understand the concept of design thinking, actually knowing how to do it takes a minute, but it's worth it. So when we know what we're doing, it becomes quick and easy for us to reach into our grab bag of methods and craft experiences for our teams that get us through this framework relatively quickly. You might be familiar with the term design thinking sprint. And that sprint is all about the ability to do excellent work in collaboration in a short period of time. So for the people who were raising that challenge of we're concerned about falling behind, we're not moving fast enough, this may be one of the antidotes to that particular challenge. Learning how to pull this off is something that takes a minute, but again, worth doing. And when you finally start to feel more confident, your work, if you're in person, may look something like this. And this is a little bit different, I think, from that standard meeting with your PowerPoint and everybody sitting around the table and a few people pushing back and some people looking at their phone under the table, because you have to be involved. You're given a job to do. You're engaged. You're actually interested because you're working on a problem you care about. And you find a safe space to be honest with your feedback and your input. Even the sprinkle piece over here, the sprinkle can has language on it that is genuine and heartfelt by the people working there. And you can see that they're not intimidated by the fact that they think there's inconsistent staff accountability from leadership. They're not scared to say that, even if the leaders are in the room. That sticky note is anonymous, nobody's tracking it. And all of this rich input goes into the conversation so that we can come out with the depths that we're looking for. So this is a children's hospital, for example. And what you also see is an increase in trust and appreciation and respect for teammates. Because if you're working on something and somebody says, oh, I'll take that piece, and all of a sudden you realize they can draw, or all of a sudden the quiet person in the back of the room comes up with a brilliant idea, it changes the dynamic in your teams. And the positive thing for many of us is that we're able to mimic this experience remotely. We had to master this during the pandemic. Actually, pretty much all the work I've done with Marina, except for maybe that first one, Marina, was remote, right? And so this is at least something that
one more in person, I think.
One more in person, exactly. But this is something that's really translated well into our online space and allowed us to be incredibly effective with remote teams. So I think this is why we're seeing more and more C-suite people, leaders, actually reaching for it and realizing that some of those elements I touched on, the trust, the engagement, the respect, the proficiency, all of these soft skills are incredibly important and starting to be the design thinking is becoming the soft skill with the highest level of growth in reach from C-suite people. And I think it makes sense, right? I think those C-suite folks who are adopting this way of working are really setting themselves apart. It's also still the main skill set that people go to for innovation. And we haven't spoken a lot about innovation, but we all know, going back to that game plan picture, that innovation is exactly what we need to be excellent at as strategic leaders. So I'm going to pause here for a minute, Peggy, and see if we have any questions just about this general intro of strategic leadership and design thinking and how they all fit together before we hear some more stories from Marina.
Just pop your questions into the chat at this time if you have any, or else if you think of some as you go along, we'll come back around to them.
Exactly. Yeah. Feel free to pepper Peggy with questions and she'll stop me. All right. So why are we here? Why is Marina here with all of her tales? Let's get into some case studies. And like I said, I've actually put this comment in one of my LinkedIn posts, and somebody said people in Iraq don't understand what I mean when I say you're spoiled for choice. Is that more of a Britishism? Have too many options. It was actually really hard for us to choose what to share with you today. But the examples that we shared are going to show two aspects, one around strategy and the other around how to really work with partners. So let's start with the strategy one, Marina, and tell us a little bit about the client and who you were working with at the time.
So I was working with the Institute for Functional Medicine. And for those who are unfamiliar, functional medicine focuses on sort of systems-based approach to health. It's aligned to many different clinician functions and can be practiced by different clinicians. And the Institute represents the leading institution that both trains clinicians. It's the only accredited institution in the United States to provide that formal training in functional medicine and certification. And so as I mentioned, I came into the role of Director of Strategic Partnerships and Innovation. 40% of my role was supposed to be international. At the time, the organization was doing about probably 6-7 years of solid work in the international space, really across the world. And when I came into the role, there was a calendar of 10 different programs that were happening everywhere from China to Latin America. And the problem was, and I was told that you need to develop a strategy around that. One of the key issues were that way that the international programs were delivered at the time were just not financially viable. It was very much mission aligned. There was two camps on the leadership side. One was, we absolutely have to do it. It's part of what makes us. And the other one was, no, we don't. This actually takes away our ability to do the important work domestically. And so I spent everybody else my first few months getting the data, understanding some of our options, creating deck, providing strategy presentations to our leadership team, getting everybody excited about that strategy. And then things couldn't be shifted to the next stage. And so we were all on board on the executive level with that. This is the way forward, but we haven't resolved the underlying issues. How are we going to bridge the gaps among the leadership, therefore then engaging fully our teams? What would make this truly implementable in the organization in the long term and sustainable while we stay true to our mission? And what does the model need to look like? Because the two camps of fully on site or fully online, we're not quite meeting the needs, whether it's the complexity of the international settings or the international partnerships needs as a whole, or the ability to really give enough resources domestically. So that was the problem where I came to Hannah and I said, we already have a fair amount of work. We actually used a lot of that work as a foundation. Here's some of the research and where we landed in terms of priorities, but we need to reset here. I think we need a different approach.
And it's funny, those of you who write statements of work for your consultants, that was what the background was, exactly as Marina described. We're stuck and we can't move forward with this international strategy because there is misalignment, basically. And so the first phase of this work was to understand those leadership expectations. What was their prior experience? What were their strategic priorities? We couldn't move forward if they were always going to pull us back. But that wasn't enough. We also needed to really give Marina a strategy with success measures and a roadmap and a plan so that she could get out of the gate and get moving. So that was the work that Salt Collaboratory did. I didn't do it on my own. I had some of my own folks helping. But we started this project, and I didn't do the math, Marina, but it took a while. And what we did is we accepted that we weren't going to be coming up with the specific ideas of what to do, what the actual programs were going to look like. We were just going to get out of the gate. We're going to make sure that we could leave her with a very rich understanding of what needed to happen. We would look at possibilities, but we would also land in a clear and aligned point so that she could move forward. So this is what the work looked like. All right. So it was an extensive program in these two phases. And what I thought we could do with some of the time that we have, and I'm going to talk fast because I really want to give you the opportunity to see how this works, is we broke it into this understand phase of let's make sure we're all on the same page about our objectives. And then we did a second phase on making sure we could break those objectives down into success measures that could be planned over the coming year. And if that sounds somewhat familiar to those of you who work with the OKR or objective and key results model, that was our reference point for that second piece of work. But to Marina's point, we started with leadership alignment. How do you get everybody on the same page? And if you can see in the tiny font here, there were lots of cooks in the kitchen, lots of very strong opinions, lots of people who'd been there for a long time. So we went to that toolkit, and the first method that we reached for is something called an abstraction ladder, which I know is familiar to some. But for those who are not used to this, is a go-to method for me when I'm working with executives who are in Discord or in all sorts of different places around what's important to them. And the way that we run this method is we put a particular challenge in the center of the ladder. How might we help international thrive? How might we meet the market in a different place? And the first thing we do is we ask participants to think for themselves. We give them their own little sticky note space. And we ask them, why does this matter? Why do you think it's important for the organization, for, in Marina's case, international to thrive?
And I want to just jump in because, sorry, Hannah, because there are a couple of questions that are really aligned to the reason why we took that journey. So I know, Julia, your question is spot on. This is actually the core reason why I ended up taking that journey through design thinking, because as I said, the strategy was there. We had the sign off from the CEO, but there was the rest of the leadership, in spite of everybody getting a nod, it didn't feel like there was true accountability to that strategy. And so we had to do that shift and almost not quite start from scratch because we had the foundation. And this challenge statement, how might we know, this is actually one of the most difficult things to do. It seems like it's super simple. How might we make the international thrive? But there is a lot that goes into figuring out what challenge statement are you going to put on that dictating the answer, but you're also not assuming that you're just asking whether or not we're going to do international, because there was already a decision that, yes, this is part of what we're doing. We have done a lot of work in creating the foundation for it, but we're not quite there in getting that move into the next step. Something is broken, so how are we going to move this forward? And so I remember going back and forth with Hannah to see, how do we structure the right question here? How do we start from the right place?
Exactly. Back to that whole deep skills space that we were talking about. You have to start in the right place. You have to be thoughtful, and you have to give people an opportunity to express what's important to them non-verbally. If you give the talking stick to somebody in the meeting, good luck getting it back if that person likes to hold on to it, right? So by migrating to this different way of working, where in the meeting, we're actually asking people to think for themselves and answer that question of, why does it matter for international to thrive? Those are the upper rungs of this ladder. Why does it matter? That's in green. And when they're finished getting their head around that, we ask them to work together in their little breakout room and put those thoughts together into a summarized version of what their breakout room thinks. Same for, how would we even get it done? We're executives. We know the space, what needs to be working really well for us to be successful. So not just dreaming, but actually being practical with this lower part of the ladder. So we explained the method. We had everybody work during the session. And at the end of it, we had the opinions and the input and the expertise and the experience of, I lost the math here, but about 12 to 15 people, all consolidated by breakout. So we knew that when people left the room, they felt like they had an opportunity to express what they think and discuss it with their team members. And that's a great endpoint. People felt great about that. But my team, we knew we had more work to do because that's still too many data points for us, too much information. So the next thing we did, these are very natural tools that we use all the time. We had to cluster. We had to put together the themes that made sense across those three groups. And we had to give the group an opportunity to review that information in a consolidated format and think about what mattered the most. Because in design thinking, we're open. We want to hear what you think, but we can't carry everything that you tell us from one stage to the next. We have to limit what we're focusing on. And so the second session with leadership was a little bit different. We shared with them some examples of what we had done and what we'd seen and what the priorities were, like health equity or global reach. When it came to what we needed to be good at, we spoke about how resourcing was important or having in-country plans were important. We're not going into the specific stickies just for confidentiality. But what you can see here is in this session, people needed to read and absorb and grasp what these different sections were. And they needed to vote. They needed to tell us what they thought was most important. So just in these two sessions, we had gotten a really great sense for them of what they care about, why it's important, how to do it, and what they think the organization really needs to focus on. Super solid stuff. Still not enough. I'm still not done with them.
And by the way, lots of surprises in that voting, because when it comes to what is the most important thing, and that actually becomes your anchor in how you build the delivery. Because, and as a sort of strategic lead on it, I was surprised that the first three priorities were not what we were stating before. But when we really come to vote and build what's most important, that actually shifted how we go about productizing afterwards. This is a very important stage.
Exactly. And the content that's coming out of here is not only rich and deep. This is what I appreciate so much about this. We were giving people time to think. And so we give them time to go beneath the surface and give us their real insights. And we're able to use these methods to pull them together and visually see what's most important. But like I said, I wasn't done with the team. Thank you very much. We were all saying, this is great. We know why it's important. We know what we need. Hold on a second. Didn't you say we've been in international for 7 years or 10 years? We must have a sense of what's working and what's not working, because we can keep dreaming, but we need to ground ourselves in reality. And for that, we used a method we use often when we're trying to assess a current situation. We ask what's going well, what's the roses, what's not going well, what are the thorns, and where are the areas of opportunity. And again, we ask each person to think for themselves. Bring us all of your experience and expertise. You've got 10 minutes to fill out your sticky notes. This is not an hour-long interview. This is not a whole project. This is a meeting where you're being quiet and telling us what you think. And in the meeting together, we're going to get a sense of where the hot spots are. So things that are pink are going well. Everyone's feeling great about the mission and the global reach. But, oh, wait a minute. We've got some issues around resourcing. We've got some issues around process. We've got some issues around partners. What are we going to do with that? If we're going to pull some objectives together, we can't leave this behind. And so when we worked on building those objectives, we pulled together one of the whys that had risen to the top, one of the hows that had risen to the top, but we didn't leave behind the current challenges that we were facing. And we were able, with some deep thinking and some blood, sweat, and tears, to come together and articulate 4 really clear objectives for the international strategy around the pillars of the organization. So what you're seeing here with what IFM affectionately calls their temple of pillars, this is the organization's macro challenges and areas of focus for the year. And it was important to us that we didn't come out of left field and start to do something that wasn't related to where the organization was trying to go. And if you're hearing me and thinking, OKRs, yes, absolutely. Don't get all excited about a side project that doesn't ladder up, that you can't talk to the board about.
And this
And
is really goes back to that question of accountability. That's how we connected the dots. Okay, so now not only that we defined our priority, we redefined how we might go about doing it. We understood where the problems were in making that happen. We also, by the way, one thing to keep in mind is you have to really think who participates at what stage to make it really that buy-in across the organization. So the first stage was really leadership. Then we cascaded it down. A lot of that rose back thorn exercises were the operational leads because they're the ones who have to do the work and they understand much better often than the leadership where the problems are. And so at that point, you had several layers of the organization involved, which is why it wasn't a 5-minute project. It really took, I think, 3 or 4 months of sort of those very strategic meetings to get us to where we were. And so once we were at this stage where we really said, okay, here's how we're going to address it. What are then the next stage is what is then realistically we can achieve, which is what we started with. My objective was I want to launch work in a way that is better aligned, that creates that strategy of sustainability that is financially viable, and I want to do it fast. But we couldn't get there without this process. This has finally unlocked our ability to do that.
right. So thanks for that, Marina. So you can see how much work went into creating the objectives. And what I love about all of this, is the fact that we had all of that buy-in and all of that work to get to the objectives and traceability. Because sometimes people say, where did this come from? How did you make up this objective? And here we have a really robust story for how the organization worked together to get there. Now, what you're looking at here is phase 2 of this work, where, as Marina was saying, I needed some concrete measures. I needed to know how far do we need to get and by when. And I needed to be realistic based on I can't have the leaders say you need to be in 10 countries by next week. They have no idea how hard it is to do this. So let's bring in the people with the experience to work with us to set those success measures. And let's challenge them to go a little bit beyond what they're comfortable with so that the success measures themselves represent an aspiration. But all of the many sticky notes and back and forth and stars that you're seeing in these first 2 workshops were deep work, getting people to think about what good might look like around each of those 4 objectives. And by the time we wrapped up this phase of the project, we left Marina and her team with the objectives, the success measures, the breakdown by quarter, and almost most importantly, the race.
Racy. That's where you get, so who is doing what and by when? Yes.
And
that was a full circle.
It really was. And what was fun with this particular RACI exercise, which as many of you know, those who aren't familiar with RACI, it's a lovely accountability and responsibility matrix for organizations. What often happens is you can have a whole long conversation around who has the A or the R and get all sorts of people upset about all sorts of things. Here, we put everybody's names, we showed them the objective, and we said, pick the letters that you think you are for all of these. Let's see where you think you fit in this particular story. And in some cases, we really did have, 3 A's. That's a conversation. Or we'd have not enough A's. That's another conversation. So this closure for Marina, I think, and you can pick up from here, Marina, set you off so that you could really start implementing your strategy.
Yeah, so I think we completed that process in June. By December, we launched our first prototype membership for Latin America, which was the region that was our test run for a new approach. And about a month later, we launched it for Europe. And by May, I was in Colombia delivering our first program, which was a hybrid program that we didn't think we can do, and we did it, that now has been continuing with several reiterations and hundreds of clinicians. So this has truly brought that full circle, really successful approach that shifted the way that that strategy became something that is of a reality.
And so I think what was fun about this one and this next one is that these are not really one-trick wonders. I think by the time we wrap things up in IFM, Marina, may have done 10 or 12 different projects for different people who somebody was sitting in the room and wanted this for their organization or their particular challenge. So we worked a lot. IFM really did start to integrate design thinking into their work. But before we wrap up, I just wanted you to give another little taste. We won't go into quite as much detail around how these methods can help you when you're building strategic partnerships and trying to take them to the next level. So tell us quickly about this particular example.
Yeah, so I'm going to switch gear for like just a couple of minutes since my actual role now, as well as my core function was developing strategic collaboration. So in this particular case, we were trying to take the organization into sort of the heart of the healthcare systems. So one of our key first successes was a pretty leading West Coast large scale healthcare system. And at that point, I actually managed to secure an outstanding membership deal, which was first of its kind. But I was working with sort of their innovation team, which was very exciting. And those of you who is healthcare know that there's a large, usually gap between the innovation teams and the day-to-day operation. And so just because you secure the partnership, that doesn't mean that you can sustain that partnership. And so while we were on the hype of, wow, we have this amazing thing going on, how do we take this into kind of the next stage? How do we take it into the future? And how do we actually work with healthcare systems as an organization, since that was new for us? So I engaged Hannah again to help me here.
So we came together to help Marina think about how her organization was going to work with these healthcare systems. And ultimately, our experience resulted in a playbook that Marina and her team could use and reuse without having to reinvent the wheel every time they met with a new partner. But with this particular partner, as Marina explained, a lot of good work had been done, but now they were in this process of having meeting after meeting, trying to figure out exactly how they were going to set things up and get the ball rolling. And I think, Marina, there were, again, 12 to 14 cooks in this kitchen, people with different opinions going round in circles. And so we said, why don't we pull everybody together and do a robust design thinking session? And we're going to base it around a tool called What's on Your Radar. Because we know that everybody in that room is thinking about a million things and is having a hard time processing all of that thinking by bucket, right? It's all over the place. And they also don't actually know what's most important. They'll start talking about one thing and then they'll remember another thing. And then before you know it, you've got spaghetti. So this is a method that really helps to reveal what people are thinking and show how they prioritize and challenges people's preconceptions about what's important. But almost most importantly, I love this last one, yields documents that inform ensuing work. Yes, you come out with a document and you can finally move forward because everybody's fingerprints is on it. So in this one, let's zoom out to how we used this platform again. We're doing the study. We're getting people together. We are actually looking at the components, the things that are important in pulling off this particular proof of concept. We have to think about the strategy. We have to think about the business model. We have to think about the patients and providers. And we have to think about it from the perspective of both organizations. So these breakout groups, we gave 2 strategies to one breakout group and 2 of these, etc. Each of these breakout groups had participants from both organizations. So now they're not just talking at each other, they're actually working together to articulate what's important first. And then when they move it into this radar diagram, they're putting the elements that they agree in their little breakout group are in fact most important for both organizations. And incredibly, you can have a conversation with smart, engaged people like that in a half an hour in their little breakout room, right? You don't need hours and hours to do this. Because you're giving them a little limited amount of time, they're having to think about the most important stuff, share it with each other, and then do that, visualize the vote again, come up with what's most important to them. So again, another example of a different challenge, slightly different tool, but same concept, putting diverse opinions and different levels of people together in a room, giving them some direction, letting them think for themselves, and coming out with an answer that can move you forward to the next stage, which is really what this whole unlock and unblock thing is all about. So, Marina, I think this one we considered a win as well.
Yeah, the one thing that also I would say in hindsight that was really important, because as I said, I was working with growth and innovation team in our healthcare system. I really worked with that leadership to say, let's bring people who are doing the day-to-day work. Who are the lead for the clinicians here on the ground that are delivering the care? So we had the head NP who was overseeing the care delivery, and her perspective and her team's perspective may have been different in terms of what's important and where the challenges are. We brought in finance people. We brought in the people who are actually in the EMR doing kind of the day-to-day work around creating smart phrases that determine the workflows for the patients. And so that range of stakeholders was really important, because as things happen, those two leaders with whom we signed the original agreement, within the next 6 to 12 months, both of them disappeared into a different role or different functions. And had we not done this work, we would have been starting from scratch, trying to sell value proposition, have new conversation with people who have never heard of us. And a lot of that work would have gone in vain. But because we had that blueprint with much wider range of input, we were able to build that sustainable engagement within that healthcare system for going into the future.
And what I like about what you're saying, Marina, which again, I feel is such an important benefit of working this way, is that even when we know that lots of people could help, sometimes we don't want to ask them because we don't know what to do with the answer. Am I going to take notes again and then bury them somewhere? This is a way where we can ask a lot of people what they think, and we do know what to do with the answer. So that changes that dynamic of getting people involved and getting those diverse opinions. So in the last little bit of time that we have, and I just want to say I'm happy to stay a little bit later. I know that we always run up to the top of the hour with a lot of stories. So if you want to stay and chat, happy to do that. But what I want you to take away from this conversation, and thanks so much to Marina for really sharing everything that she experienced working through this, is that as leaders, we work a lot with our gut and our experience, and maybe things that we learned when we were back in our consulting days or back in school, but we don't always learn new hard skills. And even though somebody said design thinking is a soft skill, I happen to think it's a hard skill. I think it's a very technical with a small t capability that we can use to get unstuck. And every time we do this, you've heard these words over and over again, we're going to end up with engagement from our teams. We're going to be much more productive. We're going to be much more creative, right? We stay in alignment. We can bring in those diversity of opinions and perspectives. But honestly, maybe the most important one is we just feel more optimistic that we can get through the slog and get the work done and maybe even enjoy the process. You don't have to take it from me. I love it that lots of studies have been done on the impact of design thinking. There are many of them. This is one that I like a lot because IBM really has helped a lot of people work into the space. I think over 140,000 people have been trained. And when they do their studies to see what the impact was, you really find that it can dramatically increase productivity. This says 2 times faster to market. Marina, I don't know what our thoughts are about how much faster we got through things working this way. If you're in product design, if you're in development, this is something that's going to make a big difference for you. And so what I want to say is if you're listening to me go on and you want to think about how this works for you, but it's scrambled eggs or whatever, I want to offer you the opportunity to connect with me and to talk about this, because I think that a lot of people will hear this kind of content and then just be overwhelmed. And I don't want you to be overwhelmed. and we don't have enough time to get into everybody's questions, but I'd be happy to spend time with you to talk about your priorities, think about what's holding you back, and see if this is a fit. And I know from experience, because I'm excited about this stuff, that invariably you'll leave with at least something that you can do differently with your teams. So if you want to talk some more and see if it's something that could be interesting for you or your team, get in touch with me on LinkedIn or email if you have it. And let's do a little clinic together, not to be too medical, but let's see if we can find some ways to explore whether it could be helpful for you too. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to suffer at work. We just need to know how to do the work that we've been given to do. So I want to pause there. And I know we're almost at time. Just say thank you. And Peggy, ask you or anybody if you have questions or thoughts or anything that you want to share as we roll into our final minutes together.
We do have a question, Hannah, from Larry about follow-on access to the materials here. I think there's so many great tools and examples. So he's curious about availability of the slides.
Oh, sure. So what I'm going to do after the session is I'm going to share the recording of this with all of you. And if you do want specific slides, because there's some client confidential stuff in it, reach out to me and let's talk about whether it's a particular slide you want or a framework that I can help you find. But apart from sharing the recording again, because I promised IFM that you wouldn't be able to really read anything important, I'm going to hang on to at least the example sections of it, if that's okay. But very happy to connect with any of you who want pieces of this for stuff that you're doing. Anything else, Peggy, that people are curious about or any comments you want to share? Mustard?
I think we've got a lot of folks who got a lot of great value out of the session today. I don't see any questions hanging out, but if you're still on and you have a question, please go ahead and let us know.
Yeah, unmute yourself. We'd be happy to hear from you and see if there's anything you want to chat about. All right, I'm going to call on my friends from Luma. John West, nice to see you. Jonathan Vardy, nice to see you. Holly, my friend who does things slightly differently, but in the same space. Any thoughts? Anything you want to share? Otherwise, we'll let folks go a little early. I've never heard you so quiet. Marina, anything from you?
No, and I see some ADA folks as well, and my team members, Sabrina and Alberto here. So looking forward to chatting with both of you afterwards. I think there's a lot of applicability, obviously. As Hannah said, reach out if you have questions, if you want to pick my brain in terms of what any other tips on any of those examples or others, happy to connect.
Exactly.
And for those of you that are chief members, I know we're going to have a in-person with a little bit even more opportunity to dig into that over the next couple of months. So that's super exciting.
And I think what happens, and Luma people can, other design thinking people can share this with me, is when you do stumble upon this, and when it is so incredibly helpful for your work, you can't help but evangelize. Because you can see the applicability, you watch people struggling, you can't take it anymore. And so in you come with some stories and some examples of what could be helpful. So I think we're all somewhat on a mission of not struggling as much as we do. I think for many of us, this body of knowledge just wasn't a thing when we were coming through our earlier years in our careers. And we'll talk about how old we are, but we're not entry level anymore, right? And we still need to do really hard stuff. So if you are going to refresh your skills, what should you learn apart from AI, right? But this one is a keeper because we always have to work with people. We always have to figure out how to be productive with our teams because there's nothing they hate more than wasting time. So on that note, it's been a pleasure to spend time with you.